Yep, our next speaker, Phil, I know you're ready. Phil Chris, Director of Quality at DFNet. He will summarize the lessons learned from several successful audits of DFNet during the past 18 months, as we dealt also with COVID-19 and moving service to the cloud. So Phil, I think you have permits already, so thanks so much, and all yours.
Okay, well, it's a double topic, but it all focuses around auditing. I really want to talk about how to make the best impressions during a virtual audit, and I want to focus on some of the issues that have been raised with validation, especially with cloud computing and COVID-19. So it's been said that since the pandemic started, it's advanced internet options, possibly by 10 years in most areas. If you look back, video phones were a concept even in the 1960s. I remember as a child seeing pictures of it. And of course, there were the Jetsons where it was part of the show. Video meeting services have been available since the early 2000s, but people still paid lots of money to hotels and airports to fly around the world to audit various companies and organizations. But desktop audits have been becoming more and more common during the last decade. And the pandemic speeded that up in a big way. Indeed, the last day I was in the DFNet office was March 11th, 2020, and it was the second day of a 2-day audit. However, only one auditor was present. 3 others joined remotely. And that was because one of them felt he was coming down with COVID and didn't want to share it. The other 2 simply were having difficulty traveling. And we brought in people from Ontario as well as Seattle virtually. And so there literally were more people participating in that audit virtually than participated in person. And I remember sending an email as I left the office saying, I won't be back till the pandemic is over. Well, 18 months later, the pandemic is still not over. And I've only been back to the office 4 times. Virtual audits really are here to stay because they save money in plane tickets, money in hotel fare and other travel expenses. They save time. You don't have to spend what it takes to get across the continent or to another city. But they sometimes leave us feeling intimidated, a little bit like George in the picture here, where the person checking on him, in this case his boss, is a whole lot bigger or seems than he is. But they really shouldn't, because a lot of things do not change. Audit agendas are still important. If you don't know what to prepare for, it's hard to be prepared for an audit. So if you want someone you're auditing to show up well, you need to give them some advance notice as to what you're looking for. Validation still remains the process of providing document evidence that this system meets its requirements. And as far as I'm concerned, for our company, a confused auditor is more dangerous than a nuclear missile. You want to make sure that anyone that comes to check on your organization understands what you do, why you do it, and how you do it. So what's changed? Well, you have fewer nonverbal cues to see whether or not the auditor is understanding the things that you're saying. Connectivity really matters. It makes a difference whether or not you have good internet connections and whether your people that are auditing you have good internet connections. The environment does seem unusual. We still haven't really gotten used to auditing remotely, but we'll get there. Nevertheless, preparation is important. So before the audit, you want to be looking at three primary things. First is the document or documents that you want to present. Second is the platform. How is it that you're going to present them? Are you going to use Teams? Are you going to use Zoom? Do you have the internet connectivity that you need? All these things are important. And of course, it's also important that those things are considered for each and every person that you want to participate. And again, this isn't totally new, but doing it online does make a difference. So first thing you want to do is when you're providing documents online, check the links. Make sure that the copies of key files are available where you know how to find them. Verify the file structure of all documents that need to be presented. Possibly record some things in advance if there's a chance the connectivity or user error might interfere with a smooth presentation. Prepare your platform. Make sure you're using a secure and reliable service. You can use any one of a number of services, Zoom, GoToMeeting, Teams, etc. Yes, do a dry run. Practice with your team, especially if it's been a while since you've been involved in an online meeting. That's probably going to become less important over time, but certainly as we get used to doing things virtually, we want to practice before we actually try to present. Think ahead, think through what's going on around your house, with your family, with your pets, with neighbors, and try to eliminate personal distractions. Do the same thing for your staff. You really want to pay attention to, is there going to be a dog barking, a baby crying, or clothes going to be scattered all around, or people going to be working? And what you wear is still important. And you really have to think about preparing each office, paying attention to what it is that the people see, what they hear. And again, verify that you've got good, solid internet connectivity. Maybe move to a different location if you don't have good internet connectivity in your home or wherever it is you were planning to present. Also, make sure that you have a list of phone numbers so that you can send a message or call somebody and do that quickly outside of the meeting if you need to communicate on the side. Of course, preparing staff was always important. You need to look at what parts of the audit agenda and make sure people understand what specific details you're asking them to address. You need to give each person ahead of time an opportunity to answer questions. If you're expecting them to present some specific aspect of how you do your work, make sure that they get the opportunity to interact with the audit agenda and be clear about what it is that they are being asked to do. Pay attention to what you know about the history of your company and your interactions with the organization. Verify that previous audits have been closed, that all findings have been resolved. Consider issues that might be driving the audit. Bad experiences someone may have had with a previous vendor may make them sensitive in particular areas. And if you can allay those particular concerns, it can put you in a better light. Also, pay attention to what regulations, what authorities they're answering to. Europeans are particularly concerned with GDPR, but everybody needs to pay attention to it. US organizations may be more concerned with HIPAA, but again, you need to consider the specifics of any situation. Did some previous vendor fail to produce evidence to support compliance with the electronic signature rule? We had that happen recently, and we were prepared to present how we meet that challenge, and it put us in good standing in the audit. Finally, what technologies does the client or its auditors have previous experience with? gives you opportunity to relate to what their concerns might be or how they understand things. You also need to prepare the auditor. You want to ask them ahead of time for verification that they've received the documents you've sent, that the links to the meetings and other things that they might have, they understand how to use, possibly even test them out to see if they work. Read between the lines in any communication that you have and ask questions that come to mind to get to the bottom of what they're really looking for. The words that they say in their email may not tell you what they're really concerned about, but if you think and put yourself in their shoes, you can help answer questions. Ask them what size resolution they have on their screen. Don't assume that an auditor can easily see everything that you're presenting, especially if your screen might be larger than theirs. Bottom line is, auditing is not and never has been complicated. It's really a matter of connecting dots. An SOP is about what must be done and how it is documented. So for each statement in an SOP, you need to be prepared to show one or more documents. It also should be obvious how the document proves that the SOP was followed. And now talking about validation, it really is just showing that a computerized system meets approved requirements. What's the computer system supposed to do? Who said it was supposed to do it? And what evidence do you have that it actually does that? So let's take a few minutes to talk about validation. Validation has always been problematic just because it doesn't come naturally. And yet it's part of life and part of history. I remember in college, people talking about various documents and statues and steels that were made in the Middle East. And was this a real document or was it a fake? Was it fabricated or was it really written by the person that it claimed to be written by? There's always some uncertainty there. And that's the way life is. Validation can never provide all the answers, but it can point people to evidence that supports the validity of your system. So what is validation? 3 simple things. It's documented evidence that a computerized system meets approved requirements. Or to put it another way, validation is the scientific method applied to computing. Validation does not provide absolute certainty. Validation realistically can't verify every possible requirement or preclude any kind of fraud. The point is to increase confidence that the tools available in DF Discover support whatever it is that you're trying to investigate. So when we say validation is supporting the conclusion that a computerized system meets approved requirements, what are we talking about? Well, computerized systems have 3 elements: hardware, software, and people. Let's talk about the hardware. Obviously, if you own or manage your own hardware, you need to be prepared with an SOP and the related documentation to show that you secured it, tested it, know its history. But if you have a cloud-based server, you need to be prepared to show the vendor security and reliability certifications. And this gets tricky because they move around from time to time. You also need to be able to show results of your own testing of that vendor's services, your history with that vendor. Then the software. Software requirements are the place where validation does get hard because you have to think like a computer. Computers don't know anything until you tell it to them. A person, you can say, go down the street and look for a red handle. Computers, you have to tell them how far to go down the street, what shape the handle is, and what color of red it is you're looking for. And in fact, it's always been the case that a huge percentage of software bugs happen because nobody clearly defined the requirement or the problem in the first place. And requirements always require tests. So you have to think twice before you create a requirement because you need to create a test to document it. So let's talk about people. First consideration for people, of course, is what training and experience is required for someone to use this system. What evidence is there have that the users have this training? What procedures control use of the system? And what evidence is there that those procedures are being followed? What roles are available to system users? Who authorize those roles for each user? All those questions need to be answered to say that you have a validated computer system, because you need to be in control of not just the hardware and the software, but also of the people. Bottom line, because it's a complex process, a risk-based approach is essential. Nobody has the resources required to validate every function. There's a limit to what anyone can remember, and treating everything as critical makes nothing important. That's really something that I think is often ignored. Everybody tries to say, well, what requirements do we have? Well, it does this, this, and that, and you can come up with a list of 100 things. If you have 100 things, you probably don't have the resources to test them all. You've made everything critical, and as a result, nothing can really be validated. So how can we at DFNet help you? Well, we can look at your validation. We can give you advice. We also provide an acceptance test kit, which, no, it does not test everything that the product does, but it does provide a test plan in advance. So for consulting, we can review your SOPs, you can review our SOPs, but of course we recommend that nobody copy anybody else's SOPs word for word because your situation is unique. We can assist you with documentation and testing. We can also help you create requirements in your format, create trace matrices that link the requirements to the testing, create supplemental tests to document things that are important in your situation that are not, maybe not even in the acceptance test kit. And we can help you execute tests within your environment. It's one of the things that virtual helps with. The acceptance test kit basically saves you the time of writing tests, because writing tests is a manual process. Of course, validation is becoming increasingly automated, and whatever we can do to automate would be helpful. However, DF Discover is a highly visual system, and so automation is more difficult. Nevertheless, it doesn't, you may have to add some tests, but there are savings in test plan writing and a reduction of test plan errors as a result of using the acceptance test kit. So we encourage that. The underlying needs for validation have not changed ever. Computers are always faster at fabricating large amounts of evidence. If you think about the way things would have worked back in the 1960s, if someone wanted to steal Social Security numbers, they'd have had to get into a bank and look at the account numbers. And you'd have to go through everything in some paper files, and it would take a lot of people. And of course, multiple people don't keep a secret about anything. Nowadays, some hacker in a basement in some remote city can hack thousands of records in a matter of minutes. But people have been forging documents and creating false evidence since the beginning of recorded history. Computers can just do it faster. Theft of information and theft of methods is part of many ancient battles and political rivalries. Nevertheless, the goals are the same. We want to prove that the conclusions we reach on our systems are believable and secure. Prove that the computer didn't accidentally corrupt something, that nobody accidentally changed or deleted data, and that private and proprietary information is protected. Here's the key. You're not looking for absolute certainty, just documented evidence to support the conclusion that your computer system did what you expected it to do. The regulations that exist in any country or in any good clinical practice were created to support science. Successful audits and reasonable validation ensure that we're doing our part to create trustworthy evidence supporting conclusions reached in clinical research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phil. Thanks for your presentation. We have so far one question in the chat, and I think we have plenty of time. So the question is, are there audit considerations for studies that include users bringing their own device?
Yes, there are. The question is, how far do you want to get into that? Certainly, I think the biggest issues are security. And you probably want to demonstrate that any insecurity on a user's device would not get transmitted into the general database or allow the user to see information that they were not entitled to see. So privacy is probably the biggest issue.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions?
Hello, this is Ivan Pisotto from Everest Clinical Research.
Hi, Ivan.
With regards to validation, we just implemented 2021, so 5.4. And one of the things that we always do within our organization, which is in alignment with our SOPs, is that we perform a full UAT. We determine, UAT, a full ATK is what I meant to say. Then we determine what the areas of highest risk are for us, and we write test plans around what that looks like. And we test those specific attributes that are important to our organization. Now, with a little focus on the ATK itself, is the ATK something that we can utilize if it's something that has been completed by DFNet to include in our validation package and say DFNet's completed the ATK, it works. And then we do some very minor testing just to make sure that we can log in and so on and so forth. Rather than having to spend, like we do it twice, right? We do it in our disaster recovery environment as a dry run, and then we do it in our production environment as a secondary, as the official validated documentation. Do you provide, or could you provide, a completed ATK that would supplement our validation of our system?
To the degree that your system matches whatever test system that we are working on, we could do that. I would encourage you to consider modifying doing it twice. In other words, once in production and once in the disaster recovery environment. I would suggest that there's some minimal testing you could do in the DR environment that showed that it was all working. I also think we may be able to provide documented evidence that we've completed the ATK on some specific hardware configurations, that within a particular environment, this is the ATK and how it works. And if you then said our environment basically had evidence that your environment was similar to where we ran that test, that then it would be applicable.
We do exactly that for our hosted clients. So for many clients, we do the hosting for them, and we do the validation package, including the ATK, and just present that as a PDF. Groups can do their own acceptance testing on their side for their studies, but we kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting for hosted clients.
Okay, well, we also host here at Everest, and that's why we feel it's important to do our own ATK. But if I can find a way with our QA team and our IT team to go through and utilize an ATK performed by DFNet, that would save us a good 20 hours minimum, because of the effort of going through the ATK twice. And there's reasons why we do it twice. I understand that it doesn't have to be done twice. That's just the way our organization has chosen to do it. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your insight, everyone.
Dan, go ahead. You have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'll just try to be quick. We've done validation for many, many years at PHRI. And generally from a validation standpoint, an audit standpoint, FDA and whatnot, you have to validate something as fit for your environment. And we see the ATK as installation qualification. There's operation qualification, and there's performance qualification. So running the ATK in our environment, in our infrastructure, validates that DF Discover is running in our environment as DFNet expects it to run, or as it has run in their environment. So unless you can prove that both environments are identical, using a run of the ATK in the DFNet environment might be difficult to use during an audit as a valid installation qualification in your own environment. That's one thing. And then we use the ATK run as an entry point into doing the system testing or operational qualification. So then we've done, we review and do a risk assessment of all the stuff tested in ATK, and then find those things that are, that we feel in our environment that we use more, or that the ATK hasn't tested sufficiently. And we create a test spec, test plan on what to test. And we do that in our environment as the system test. And the end of the system test is an entry point into user acceptance testing. So then the study teams come up, a subset of the study teams come up with test cases for their specific studies. So somebody might have a very complicated visit map. And the system testing, we don't test visit maps and complexity like that. We test the basic functionality that works, the audit trail, the authentication, all those sorts of things. But then the study teams through the UAT testing test things specific to their study complexity. And then at the end of that, we have a validated system, right? Gathering all that information. And then the other thing that's kind of good to test is, the boundary conditions. If you can only have, 256,000 sites or participants or whatever, even though you don't create that, do you test those boundaries? Do you find those points at which the system could break if you get to there? And how does the system behave, and whether that corrupts data? So that goes into, I think, the performance testing, which, I would agree, it's crazy. As Phil was saying, there's just too much stuff to test, especially when you get into performance testing and positive, negative, and boundary conditions. It is impossible, really. So you then do, again, a risk analysis as to what things you're most likely going to run into, and you make sure you test those. And we've found over the years that following that sort of process has stood us well during audits. That's been well received, and we have it after years and years, I think, down to almost an art. So that's kind of my input into that discussion.
And I would agree that each organization needs to assess their own risks and really compare that to the costs of the various testing that's proposed.
the same, like, and are you running, studies where there is regulatory oversight? Is it a treatment study or is it like an epi study, right? And to what degree of testing or as if the FDA ever comes in and audits you, it's really about the protection, the safety of the patient, the correctness of the data, and the interpretation of that data is correct, right? And the more a study is dealing with treatment type studies where patient safety is at risk, the more they will dig in and require higher levels of
Really?
Which is why we have study level testing at DFNet and edit check testing at DFNet, because in the various studies, we have some very specific requirements. And some of the studies, of course, have more stringent requirements than others, as you said. And some of the edit checks are more important than others. Some of them are kind of conveniences, and some of them are actually critical to ensuring participant safety or ensuring the accuracy of study endpoints and other important or data that has a higher level of importance, I guess is what I want to say.